we have, I'm going to turn off my camera. We have with us Dr. Dana Ingalsbe to talk to us today about authentic assessment and alternative assessment. And this has been a pretty hot topic, especially as we're moving to more online learning. And so I'm excited and looking forward to seeing what Dr. Ingalsbe has to say. And so I'm going to pass it along to her. And if anyone else has their webcam on, please go ahead and turn it off. Okay, I'll be quiet now and take it away.
Hey everybody, I've turned my webcam off too because I'm sharing these slides. Can everybody see those?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hope that everybody's doing well, and I'm looking forward to today's talk. I volunteered to do this not because I knew a lot about it, but because I was really interested in it, and I've learned so much through the research that I've done and the articles that I've read in preparing for today's presentation. So the title of the talk is Alternative and Authentic Assessment. So how's that for alliteration on this Tuesday? We're just going to call it alternative assessment, but the purpose of this is to examine how we assess learning in the courses that we teach. And I'm not an educator in terms of my background. I'm a scientist, I'm an engineer, but I've learned a lot about assessment through my time at JSU. Originally, our department was part of the College of Education and Professional Studies, and so I was in several meetings where we talked about these kind of topics. Sure, there are many of you who know more about this than I do, so I look forward to you chiming in, and I hope this is participatory. I'm going to pull up the chat so that I can see what folks are saying and hopefully keep up with that as we go through today's presentation. So I'm going to be talking about really defining what alternative assessment is, and then talking about what kind of assessments we're commonly using in higher ed, and then talk about why someone should consider alternative assessment, and then give some examples and some tips regarding how one would use alternative assessment in a course. So this is the question, what is alternative assessment? It's really a means of determining whether a student has learned something that does not involve a traditional test. Someone's got the mic on. I'm hearing some background noise. So alternative assessment looks at student learning that doesn't involve a test or an exam. What is authentic assessment? It's really a form of alternative assessment. It's a means of determining student learning that involves performing real-world tasks or demonstrating the application of essential knowledge and skills. So think of authentic as something that a student would need to do in their profession once they've graduated from your program. So in the case of applied engineering students, let's say someone who is graduating with our occupational safety and health management degree, an individual would need to know how to perform a dust sampling study and determine if the dust levels are too high in a place of employment so that employees are working safely. That would be an example of an authentic assessment. Would a student know how to demonstrate something like that? All right, so I'm going to ask you in the chat now, why do we so frequently use traditional forms of assessment? Why are we using tests and exams frequently. You know, here at JSU, we have a time block at the end of the semester for exam week, final exams. And so clearly it's prioritized here at JSU and at schools across the country and around the world. So why are we using them? Todd says they're easy, okay, to assess teaching and learning, okay, if it was effective. Students are comfortable with it. Yes, most definitely. First time fits time constraints of classes, and the speed of response is related to mastery, okay. Any other reasons why we may use traditional tests and exams? Yeah, it's what we've always done. So we're just comfortable. Tradition, yes. So it's something that the Academy has embraced over time, and we're just continuing to use those. And students do know what to expect. Students are comfortable with those. Okay, face validity, right? I'm going to talk about some other reasons why we may use traditional tests and exams, traditional assessment, and talk about some of the pros and cons of using traditional assessment. So for some programs, traditional assessment, like an exam, might be required by the accreditation body, or it might be required for a certification that students earn as part of the program. Let's face it, if you adopt a textbook, you may get a test bank full of questions related to that textbook. And like Todd said, wow, that's easy. I can import that test bank into Canvas or my LMS, and the questions have been authored. The test gets graded automatically. And so that relates to the next point. It's easy for the instructor. You can post the questions, you can post the quiz or exam, and you can grade it. You know, a traditional test like short answer, true, false, fill in the blanks. This is what I'm talking about in terms of traditional assessment. You don't have to have any subjectivity when it comes to grading. Everything is black and white. The question is right or the question is wrong. We don't have to pass any kind of judgment on the quality of answer that's provided. So there's another ease of use factor. Someone mentioned this, that it's tradition, it's students know what to expect. I'd say that it's this prevailing norm. It's what we as educators are used to and what students are used to. And I think we've mentioned some other pros. I don't want to come out against traditional assessment. It really does have its place. It's nothing that's going to go away. We all use it. I use it, and I'm certainly not speaking from the viewpoint that we need to change everything towards alternative assessment. But I think that it's best used in certain situations, and we may need to rethink it in other circumstances. And so traditional assessment does have some benefits. Now let's look at some of the cons regarding the use of traditional assessment. So a one-time test is not really a learning experience for the student. It can't really be enhanced by other course activities. In many cases, that test is a one-and-done experience that the student has, and they've either been successful or unsuccessful in that encounter. And so it's not really in and of itself a learning experience. The preparation for it certainly can be. The debrief afterwards certainly can be. But the test in and of itself does not offer a learning experience for the student. How many of you have encountered academic dishonesty if you've used some of these multiple choice tests in your classes? If you have, that's not an uncommon experience. It's well documented that wide use of tests like this across courses or across programs can really promote cheating. And I know that In our department, we've certainly had some instances. I think almost every issue with academic dishonesty that we've encountered has involved the use of some traditional assessment being offered to the student. Aspects of exams are really artificial. How often are you going to have a graduate of your program sit down, need to recall things from memory, have no one to call upon, no resources to pull from, and have to answer questions that may be definitions of things or very low-level aspects of a course? Exams don't always represent what we do as professionals when a student would graduate from a program. And so in that regard, they're artificial in many senses. And I'm not talking about all exams and assessments. I'm talking about certain aspects. When it comes to online coursework, proctoring is a factor. And here at JSU, we've used online proctoring in classes. Something that I've learned in the past few months is that proctoring can negatively affect student success in online test taking. And that isn't just in a traditional assessment, that can be in an essay test as well. But the student taking the test and knowing that someone is sitting there watching them as they work on completing the test can really increase test anxiety. And I had a student actually say to me, I get so nervous taking a proctored test because I know someone's watching me the entire time I'm taking the test. So that was something I certainly didn't know. I didn't think about that. And something else that I learned about the proctoring process is that it adopts something that's called deficit model thinking. When a test is proctored, there's an assumption that the student's already about to cheat. We preemptively suspect the students of cheating when we proctor a test. I hadn't thought of that before, but the student is certainly going to have, if I knew that someone thought that I was about to cheat, that would affect my morale and feeling about taking that assessment. And so proctoring has, in addition to the cost, of course, and the technical challenges in the online environment, it can have some other effects as well that I certainly was not aware of. Traditional assessments typically assess low-level learning, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute in the coming slides. Traditional testing might not always be aligned with the learning objectives in the course either. There was an example that I read about where the professor was having really rich discussions during the class that she was teaching, and the students were very engaged in the discussions, and she could tell that there was a lot of really great learning happening during the course. She gave the students a multiple choice test, and by and large, they bombed. Those questions on the multiple choice test didn't really reflect what they were talking about. They were not the same as what had been discussed in the class. And so if a traditional assessment isn't designed well, it may not really be measuring what you're trying to do in the course. Okay, that's also called alignment. Okay, thanks, Chris. An interesting thing that I read about is the idea that if we create a challenging final exam or a challenging test, it can be perceived as being a more valuable assessment. But this can also be demotivating for students. If a student knows that they can study and then do poorly on the test, that can be demotivating. And that's something behind test design too. If a test isn't designed well and is too challenging, that's demotivating rather than motivating for students. So pros and cons of traditional assessment. I think that, it certainly deserves our attention. And as I said, a lot of things here I was not aware of until I looked into it. So I hope that this is helpful as you think about the courses that you're teaching. So I mentioned that traditional assessments typically test low-level learning. And so I just wanted to talk about Bloom's taxonomy. And you're probably familiar with this, but if you're not, I wanted to put it on the slide. A traditional test, multiple choice, true, false, those kind of tests are typically looking at those low-level learning criteria. So Bloom's taxonomy classifies learning objectives into levels of complexity and specificity. And so here, if you're giving a multiple choice test, there's a pretty good chance that it's really only assessing the bottom two types of objectives. So for example, if I'm teaching a materials and processes of industry course that I've traditionally taught, a remember kind of question that identifies facts would be, name 3 different types of steel alloys. And then understand might say, would aluminum perform well in situations where it's placed in a state of tensile stress? So now they're comprehending some of the facts. They would have to know about the tensile strength of aluminum. So this is pretty low-level learning in terms of what our students would need to know when they go out into the workforce. What our goal should be is to embrace all of the levels of Bloom's taxonomy, going from remembering those fundamental facts to understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and ultimately creating. So some of those, a higher level problem would be a question, something like, the following part, showing a mechanical part, operates under certain conditions, and I would show the conditions. What would be the preferred metal alloy for this product and why? That would cause them to have to take all of the elements that they've learned about. And okay, so can you see Bloom's taxonomy with the vertical oval?
Yes.
Okay. So ultimately, you want the student to not just be able to memorize facts and definitions, but you want them to be able to synthesize everything that they've learned and form new ideas, come up with new concepts based on what they have learned in the class. Okay, so we're going to pause for a second. I'm just going to look through what's on the chat there. Chris, is there anything from the chat that we may need to talk about?
What I was talking about.
I see slide 8 from 25 of 25. I was wondering if you advanced or.
I'm on 13.
Oh, really?
Is everyone else seeing Bloom's taxonomy with the vertical oval?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
we all see 13.
Great. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I
Okay.
can. Thanks.
When I was mentioning alignment, I added a little, it's a free article from DFink, and he talks about alignment between your learning objectives, your learning activities and assessments, which is exactly what you're just talking about. And then also the other link is actually it's based on Bloom's taxonomy, and it is a learning objective tool to help you create learning objectives, and it's based upon that graphic that you see right there.
Okay.
And Heidi is talking about stereotype threat, which is interesting. I'd never heard of that. So you might want to talk about that.
That was just a side note that it made me think about it. It was totally tangential to the conversation.
Okay, well, it's interesting.
That's okay. So, that's interesting.
And then David commented about writing. Yeah, you can see that.
I think that just, having this reminder on hand, and I'm going to put all the articles that I pulled from into a document and share it with all of you afterwards. I didn't have time to get it pulled together before I spoke, but I'll include those links, Chris.
Okay. Does anyone else, since we stopped, does anyone else have any questions about anything that Dr. Ingalsbe has gone over, or does anyone have any comments, questions?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I'll continue on. So something that I came upon pretty recently is a study done by NACE, and NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. NACE works to determine career competencies for students who are coming out of four-year colleges. So you see a lot in the news about workforce development, and a lot of that is aimed at community college or career tech programs, apprenticeships, and things like that. What you don't see a lot of is career development and workforce development from the viewpoint of higher ed. And so NACE has some really interesting resources on its website, but one that really caught my attention was the 4 career competencies that employers value the most. And so I want to share those with you because they really do line up with some of the things that we should be trying to promote in our assignments and in our courses. And it's certainly given me ideas of things that I want to incorporate in our applied engineering classes to prepare our students with, I don't like the term soft skills, but with skills that are going to help them to be successful. So the top 4 career readiness competencies, according to NACE, the first is critical thinking and problem solving. So right out of the gate, what I noticed is that low-level learning is not going to be contributing towards critical thinking or problem solving a great deal. Notice that that's defined as exercise sound reasoning to analyze issues, make decisions, and overcome problems. It sounds a lot like that synthesized peak of the Bloom's taxonomy pyramid that we just looked at, being able to take that information in order to make decisions. The second competency is oral and written communication. Well, again, a traditional assessment is not going to do a lot to encourage growth in terms of a student's oral and written communication. So this is articulating thoughts and ideas clearly and effectively in written and oral forms to persons inside and outside the organization. So fascinating to me. The top 2 are really ones that you can certainly incorporate into your classes. 3 and 4 are teamwork and collaboration, and then digital technology, which is just taking existing digital technologies to solve problems, complete tasks, and accomplish goals. So I just had a question that are essay questions and presentations considered traditional? No, I think by definition, what I've read is that traditional assessment is viewed as multiple choice, true, false, short answer, fill in the blank types of tests and assessments. So as you can see, these competencies are things that we could consider when creating authentic or alternative assessments as well. And so I wanted to include those. I found them interesting, and I thought you would as well, because they give some real ideas as to things that we can do in in our courses. And I suppose they also show the limitations of traditional assessment in terms of developing those workplace career competencies. All right, so moving ahead, I want to talk about some alternative assessment ideas that you may want to consider in your courses. As I said, I don't consider myself an expert in this area. I've looked through a lot of different articles and resources, and there may be some assessments that you're using in your courses that are very effective, and I hope that some of you will share those if you're using them. So the first is actually open book examinations, and this was a little bit surprising to me, but the argument for open book examinations is that they're really quite realistic in terms of when a student would go out into their professional life and work on a project or work on a problem. They're going to have resources to draw from. So on an open book exam, what you would want to do is draw specifically on content from the course notes or the lectures rather than something that can be Googled. Like, you're not going to ask definition questions, for example, on an open book exam or something directly from the textbook. You would want to keep the time frame rather tight so that the students won't be successful if they don't already know the material. Yes, they'll have their notes. Yes, they'll have their textbook at their disposal, but they have to know the material. They're not going to have time to go on a scavenger hunt through their book and through their notes looking for the right answers. So this, Tina, your question about essay questions could really apply to the open book exam, where you ask some kind of application and analysis question to challenge the students and make sure they fully understand and synthesize the concepts. So for example, in a electronics class, we could have the students draw a schematic of a diagram, a schematic of the way that something should be connected. You could have a student read through a scenario and then write down how they would approach that scenario based on what they've learned in class. Ideally, you're going to provide a couple of practice problems in class prior to the exam so that the students know what to expect, because let's face it, I don't think that open book exams are really the norm in academia nowadays. And so the student may just think, well, I don't really have to study because I can open my book. But if they're made aware of the kind of questions that you're going to be asking, they would be able to prepare more effectively. So some may argue that an open book exam, we should avoid them because then students won't be forced to memorize the material. But is the goal really to have the students memorize the material? Or is the goal to have students have the ability to synthesize the concepts and discuss how they're going to apply their knowledge to solving problems? And I would argue the latter. And so an open book exam may be something that you need to consider. Now, of course, the downside perhaps of using an open book exam is that, let's face it, essay questions are harder to grade. It's not something that you're going to be able to just have automatically graded. It's something that's going to require more of your time and effort in terms of grading it. But if it's something that's worth 30% of the final grade in a course, that may be time well spent in order to really determine whether the students have learned the content of the class. Similar to an open book exam is a crib sheet. I use this in several of my classes where the student can bring in one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and write anything in their own handwriting on that piece of paper when they come in for the test. So the benefit to this is that the student is going to have to prepare that document and decide what information is essential and non-essential to include on the piece of paper. And so the preparation process for this is a real learning process, And similar to the open book exam, you can ask some more comprehensive questions, more complex questions on that test. But it's very similar to open book, just that you're limiting the resources a little bit. I think that in the past, the School of Education, at least some of the departments, have used student portfolios. And I know that I'm showing an artist here in terms of making a portfolio, but it does not necessarily need to apply only to students in artistic majors. This is a very authentic kind of assessment where a student takes his or her best work either from a class or from across their program as they go through the program. And it can be electronic, or it can just be a physical collection of their best work. So Chris says that education still uses it, and that the Doctorate of Nursing Practice, DNP program, uses it too. So this can be electronic or it can be physical. I've read about having the student annotate the portfolio. So in other words, the student presents the work, but they also describe why each piece represents best work on the part of the student. And I just thought this was really interesting. In terms of motivation, the student can use this portfolio when they're on a job interview, when they're on an audition, if they're in a graduate school interview, or just to demonstrate mastery of skills and learning objectives. So here in the Department of Applied Engineering, we do not use portfolios, but they would be worthy of consideration in terms of students who complete industry projects, who earn certifications, who perform training or service outside of the department in the manufacturing community. So this is something that can be used for evaluation as well, or assessment. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I've gone through 4 different alternative assessments, and I just want to pause in case anyone has any questions or comments at this point.
If anyone is talking, make sure you remember to turn off your mic. I mean, turn on your mic. No one has comments or questions?
That's all right.
Okay.
All right, that's fine. I just thought I would ask. The next alternative assessment idea is the demonstration or performance test. This is a very authentic, we're waiting for some more good stuff. Thanks, David Dempsey. Performance test or demonstration. So this is a kind of assessment where you would have a student demonstrate a complex skill or procedure. So the student can create a final product. They demonstrate an application of the knowledge and skills learned in the course. And the instructor can observe and assess the process. For this kind of assessment, you would need some kind of rubric or some kind of scoring guide in order to assess the student in a consistent manner. Well, so I'm going to give you an example of this. I've taught in the past, I haven't taught it recently, but an industrial training course where our students learn how to provide training in the industrial setting. And so the students are based on training presentations that they give in the course. I really don't give tests in that class because I want to ensure that the students know how to prepare, deliver, and assess the effectiveness of the training that they give. So in class, we talk about and learn about the different elements of a training presentation, from the preparation work to the documentation to the elements of the presentation, and then how they would evaluate whether the training was effective in that industrial environment. How can you determine that? The students, when they deliver the presentations, have to involve their classmates and teach them a new demonstrable skill. So this is an example of a performance test because it's not strictly a presentation. There are a lot of different elements to it. And really, a written test would not be effective in determining whether the student has really learned how to provide training. It isn't just simply delivering a traditional presentation. There are many more elements, and I have a rubric that breaks down all of those elements for the student to see and then for me to see as I'm observing them as they deliver that training. And the students are very engaged in that assignment. Guess what? Their peers are watching them. They're participating in the assignment because they're the trainees in that class, and I'm observing them too. So there's a little bit of positive peer pressure there. I allow students to pick their own topics with my approval, so they're interested in what they're researching and what they're talking about, what they're demonstrating in the training. And so that has been a really engaging alternative assessment in that class. And the feedback that I get from students is I feel really confident when I'm finished the course because I've actually delivered training. They actually do 3 different training presentations in the course, from basic and then adding skills as we go through the course. I think they also enjoy the fact that there's we don't have exams in there. It's practical assessments. And there are other examples I'm sure that you could consider: writing a computer program, designing a part using AutoCAD, testing a part in the lab, performing a certain lab experiment and being evaluated on that. I think there are countless ways that we can consider where a student can demonstrate their skills in a simulated professional environment or career environment. The next is a comprehensive project. This is another form of authentic assessment because students are going to complete projects when they get out into the workforce. And I would say this one really encompasses many of the career competencies that I discussed earlier. So students really learn well when they're working toward a specified goal. And a comprehensive project can be something that the student completes at the end of the term, either independently or in collaboration with others. So for example, we might have students design a robot that can sort colored balls into different containers. They know exactly what the outcome of that project is to be. It's going to use the different skills that they've learned in the course, and they may have to work together with other people in order to solve problems and make that project a reality. Another one may be designing a control system that can regulate the flow of water into a tank and then turn on a light when the tank is full. That's something that our students may do. Your students may design educational materials based on concepts in the course for a group outside of the university, maybe some kind of community service type project. So all of these kinds of projects involve specified goals that will call upon the skills and the knowledge that was gained in the course. Students are going to be especially invested in work that is evaluated by others. Our students complete industry projects during their senior year, and we've called upon their supervisors at the different businesses where they work to come and participate in the evaluation process. And that's been a really neat way for students to demonstrate what they know and to involve often our alumni and our industry partners. And students really take it seriously. I think that, it's a real warm-up to working professionally. Another good thing about a comprehensive project is that the students need to ask the right questions in order to gather information. Things don't always go the way we plan, and I would say they seldom go the way that we plan. And so understanding that and learning to ask questions in order to solve problems is a key element of a comprehensive project. When students work in a group, they're going to learn that teamwork and collaboration skill. And you've heard students say, I hate group work. But my response to them is that group work never stops. You're going to work with people who don't carry the load or who try to take things over, as it were. And that is going to be something that you need to learn how to handle. And so when the students work collaboratively, they have to learn how to divide the labor. They need to figure out how to continue to be productive when conflicts arise. And this, again, is one of those important NACE competencies that we can help our students to develop. David says, when I have students present in my senior seminar, I also have other students do a peer assessment following a rubric. Then I compile responses. Yes, I've done that too. And when I have students work on a group project, I have them evaluate their teammates to see, to tell me, how the teammates contributed. And so the students know that they're going to participate in that. So projects are really engaging. They're not those high stress situations that exams are. And wow, students learn so much through completing projects. And I think of all the alternative assessments, this is probably my favorite because it's just exciting to see the students synthesize, produce something new from what you've taught them in the class. It's very fulfilling for everyone. So I was asked about presentations. I use presentations in many of the classes I teach, simply because I think that the more that a student will get the opportunity to talk in front of their peers, that's a safe environment for them to present. They're going to really develop those skills. Public speaking, they say, is the #1 fear, even more than death. And so let's help our students to get comfortable with making presentations. I agree with you, David. Students are more afraid of presentations, but then afterward, they're really proud of their work and they learn a lot. One phrase that I say is that, you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And presentations are one of those very uncomfortable situations, but presentations can be a great alternative assessment, especially if you let the students, again, pick their topics, pick something that they're interested in, and then approve it or suggest changes to it so that it's more appropriate for the course. I like to do that. Some of my courses where we perhaps don't go in depth on certain topics, I allow them to do a presentation and dig deeper and research that topic more, find some cases from the literature or from industry that they can talk about that are related to a concept. And so the students select the topic, and that really gives them ownership of that topic from the beginning. And then they research the topic and prepare the materials for the presentations. Doing a peer review of presentations is really effective because it gives the students the opportunity to view other students' work. I do this in Canvas. So I have the students do a voiceover PowerPoint or do some variation of that, and then they can either post the presentation to YouTube or Microsoft Stream and post it in Canvas. And if we have 25 students in the class, I don't want the students having to watch 24 other videos. So I use the peer review feature in Canvas and ask the students to peer review 2 other presentations. The students are given a rubric. I also grade the students on their peer reviews, saying you can't just say that everything was great. You have to spotlight some areas for improvement too. Give some helpful feedback, not just entirely positive. We can all improve. And so this gives the students some good experience. Our students, many of them are going to go into management positions where they're going to have to provide employee reviews and give feedback. And so this is a little bit of practice in that area. This helps with that digital technology competency where students are going to learn to become comfortable interacting with technology as part of their communication toolbox. How to prepare for the unexpected and how to prepare for technical issues and how to plan and manage time. So the students are going to work on public speaking and presentation skills. These are essential to clear communication. And like David said, they're going to become a lot more comfortable with this, especially the more presentations that they're given the opportunity to complete. It really grows the students' confidence and helps. Yeah, and the peer review feature in Canvas really is pretty easy to set up. Once the assignments have been submitted, the student can go in there and see the other two presentations or whatever it is that they have to review. And that's, they like that. Then they get to watch two rather than having to watch all of them. And it helps me too, because I get to see how the students are viewing their peers' work. So that's a neat experience. Are there any other alternative assessments that you've used in your courses that you found to be very effective? I'd love to hear from you about that. Oops, I didn't mean to forward that. Okay, and so I'm going to circle around now and ask the question, so what about traditional assessment? As I said, there's no need to completely get rid of it. I don't think it's going anywhere soon. I don't think JSU is going to get rid of final exam week. I think we're still going to have finals and midterms and tests. But where is traditional assessment best used in our courses? If we're going to use some of those publisher included test banks, where's the best place for those? Well, these can be used as something called a formative assessment, and a formative assessment is an assessment that's going to help faculty and students to identify their strengths and weaknesses so that teaching can be adjusted, reviewed, modified along the way. So you can use a true, false, multiple choice, short answer, fill in the blank quiz as an assessment to just see if the students are understanding what you're talking about, or if they've completed the reading assignment, or a very low stakes assessment to see where students may need help. I think one of the things that we traditionally do with our traditional assessments is we use them as these high stakes assignments where the grade for the class rests largely on this test. And I think the encouragement here is for us to make a shift away from that, because traditional assessments tend to not do a great job of really assessing higher level learning, and use these as low stakes assessments. So, for very few points in a course to just help the faculty member perhaps see where a student may need help. Where traditional assessments should be avoided are in high stakes situations, such as a final exam or a midterm exam, or something that's worth a substantial number of points in the class. A summative assessment is one that evaluates student learning at the end of a unit or the end of a semester, comparing it to some kind of a benchmark. And that's, traditionally what we use. It's not always a traditional assessment that's used in a summative way. These alternative assessments can certainly be summative assessments, but you want to avoid traditional assessments in determining whether student learning has taken place in a course. That is what I've prepared for today, and I really appreciate the comments in the chat. Those have been nice to read. They've been helpful. I appreciate your reflection on this topic. I hope that you've found the content helpful because, well, quite frankly, I have. I know that it's going to affect how I teach moving forward. As I said, I've used some of these, but some of the things I wasn't aware about, like test anxiety with proctoring and things like that. Are there any questions or comments as we wrap things up? You're welcome.
And the room is silent.
Wow.
Does anyone have anything? So you've got they're more comfortable chatting. I mean, in the chat box.
Chat away. Yeah, the peer review process was a little tricky to set up the first time, but I think I did something incorrectly. But when I tried it after that, it worked flawlessly, and I enjoyed it, and the students did too. Thanks, Joe. Thanks.
I will say that I don't know that anyone in here ever tried to use the peer review in Blackboard. The peer review function in Blackboard was so confusing that we actively told instructors not to use it. So Canvas is much more easy to use.
In many regards.
Yeah.
Found anyway.
That's a good comment, David.
Yes, I was trying to reply to you, but for some reason I can't. Yes, it's not going, we do need to think about new ways to assess student learning. And it does vary by discipline, most definitely.
Yeah, and in math, most of our assessment is not really subjective, but partial credit and kind of open-ended, but it's still pretty standard and doesn't necessarily synthesize a lot. But some of those assessments you mentioned, we do try to do things like that, take-home exams or crib sheets or other ways, and presentations in upper-level classes are really useful too.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at Heidi's comment. She's right. I don't know why I laugh, but she's right.
True. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Ingalsbe. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Y'all have a great week. You're welcome.
Everyone have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you again.
Bye for now.